Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Series 9 of the Climate Pioneers Show. My name's Cherry, and I'm the founder of Above and Beyond Recruitment. We are a climate tech recruitment business working with startups and scale-ups to hire mission-driven talent and build teams. And this series, we're speaking with founders and leaders of scaling climate businesses to hear all about their business journey to date, the challenges they've faced, and the lessons that they've learnt along the way. So if you're a founder yourself, maybe perhaps slightly earlier on in the process than some of our guests, we hope that these stories will inspire you, inform you, and maybe help you feel a little bit less alone on the journey. And today I'm joined by Thomas Farquhar, CCO of Heatio. Heatio is a UK-based clean tech company founded in 2020, focused on developing innovative solutions for home energy management to improve energy efficiency and reduce carbon emissions in residential properties. Heatio secured funding last year, have built partnerships with major energy providers and property developers across the UK, and have been recognised as one of the most promising climate tech startups in the UK. So, Thomas, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, really good to be on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And tell us a little bit more. Tell us more about Heatio, because I gave a very brief intro there, but tell us more about the problem you're solving, the solution that you've developed, and why you feel it's unique and needed in the market.
Problem we're trying to solve is people becoming more energy efficient and ultimately going towards renewable technologies in the home. And what we found was the biggest problem is people don't have the information or the data to support those decisions. So we've developed a platform that gives businesses all the data they need on a customer's home, so they can give that information to the customer to get them to ultimately move towards net zero. Do you want me to delve into that a little bit? What that actually means?
Yeah, if you could, that'd be helpful. Yes.
Yeah. What we're trying to do is become sort of the Experian of energy data. So currently, if you're in the financial sector and you're an insurance company or a mobile phone company or whatever it might be, you call on people's credit file to ultimately sell them something and help them on the journey. And what we're trying to do is do the equivalent with energy, where if you're an installer of renewable technologies and you want to find out information about a customer's property to better sell them those renewable technologies, you can call on their energy file, see how much energy they're using, see what the impact would be of solar or insulation or whatever it is you want to help them with, and then use that information as part of your sales journey.
Amazing. So it's allowing them to better target who the right customers are that are likely to convert, but also to give them some really good sales collateral to approach that conversation with. Did you know you could save X, and it be relevant? And yeah.
And the key is it's all without going into the home. So you're getting this information from the customer's home, so you can say, right, I can present to my customer exactly what the impact of these different things would be, how much it's going to cost them to have them, how much they're then going to save, all without having to visit. So installers are a one target demographic, but it could also be a bank, and the bank might say, we'd like to be able to do green lending to our customers. So what we need to be able to see is how much energy they could save or validate the affordability. It's the same data coming from the same people.
Amazing. And what was the genesis of the business? How did you meet your other co-founder? How did the idea come about? How did you spot this pain point?
So Simon and I have worked together for best part of 20 years now. We had a previous business together in the sector. So we've always worked in renewable technologies and interacting with consumers. So we've seen the pain points evolve along that time. And we got to the point of saying, right, what's the next pain point? And it's how do you get the right information in the hands of the people that are talking to consumers to better educate them and provide them with the tools so they can actually help customers move to affordable, clean energy.
Yeah. And that's, I suppose, brilliant in that you've seen this pain in reality actually happening through other businesses that you've run, and having worked together before, I suppose, as well. You knew it's not like going into your first founding relationship together. You already know how to work together and what you like.
Yeah, we're very fortunate.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. And so you've been, as you said there, you've been in this space for what, 20 plus years now?
Yep.
How have you seen the kind of clean tech, climate tech, home energy market evolve in that time?
I think the main thing is the technologies themselves have improved quite a lot from when we first started. So there's been a lot of technological advancements, and I think we're probably now getting towards the peak of where we're going to go technically. One thing that has been quite slow is consumer uptake, which seems to be a UK problem. We're behind basically the rest of the world in terms of our uptake of renewables. And that's why when there's been wars on the other side of the world, we've been impacted quite heavily because we've been so reliant on fossil fuels. But it feels like that's starting to change. And the big driver seems to have been electric cars.
Yes.
Electric cars seems to be the pivot point where consumers are now getting their head around, a different way of using energy, different times of using energy, different tariffs. And the electric car seems to be the bit that's getting them excited and then moving on to other things.
And what do you think? I mean, you said there that the UK is really behind the curve on adoption of these technologies. What do you think is holding homeowners back from adopting low carbon technologies into their home? And what are we getting wrong here that other countries are doing so much better than us?
So the thing that I think is holding us back, which is where we're trying to come from, is the information. So if you go to the average person in the street and say, for example, what have you got a heat pump? The first answer will be no, and the second answer will probably be what's a heat pump. Whereas in Europe they just get on with it. So one of the things is misinformation, and then is lack of information, and then the other thing is misinformation. So we've spent a long time with certain parts of the industry fueling misinformation and fear around some of these technologies, and it started with electric cars. The first electric cars were all given a bad name, and people said you couldn't get the range and they were never going to take off, and they have now taken off. So I think we've spent a long time clinging on to the fossil fuel industry, and making a problem for ourselves where people don't trust the technology, and we're now having to battle through that trust. Whereas nobody ever asks how a gas boiler works; you just get a new gas boiler. Whereas when you start talking about heat pumps, suddenly consumers want to delve into the mechanics and the physics, and
it's so right.
And that's because there's this distrust around the tech.
Yeah, but I suppose why has that not been a problem in Norway or in Sweden, right? Have they just at a government level been better at informing the public about these technologies? Are people there not perhaps as mistrustful of new technology? What do you think they're doing better in these companies that have higher adoption rates than we do?
All of the above, but also I think they've started from probably a bit further ahead because they've been very used to electrification. So they've already had things like air conditioning and electric water heating and that sort of thing. So moving towards heat pumps and solar is sort of a natural evolution. Okay. Whereas in the UK, we've got a very high uptake of mains gas, and people having gas boilers, and they can get their head around burning gas makes me warm. So I think, Europe had a sort of an advantage in terms of their infrastructure, but then the public, I don't know why, but don't seem to be as bothered about how stuff works. It's more, well, it's going to heat, it's going to provide hot water, it's more efficient, put it in. Whereas we seem to have the opposite problem.
Absolutely. I mean, to your point about misinformation, I mean, my husband is a builder. And so he's speaking to trades a lot of the time. And as somebody myself who works in the climate space, I'm always saying, we need to get a heat pump. We need to look at solar. And the thing he always comes back with is someone on site said, but you don't want to do that. It'll be more expensive than your current boiler. You'll never get your shower as hot. There's all these different, very noisy they are. There's all these different these things that he hears on site that trades are, this misinformation that trades, I suppose, are perpetuating almost. Are there any common myths you'd like to bust here and now for anybody listening?
Yeah, I mean, probably the ones you've mentioned. So are they noisy? No. We put a video up online a couple of years ago where the Tesla next to the heat pump was louder. So they're basically an air conditioning unit, and they're not any noisier than any other appliance. If you stand next to one, the only time it's noisy is if you put your ear right next to the fan while it's blowing, which no one would ever do anyway. So no, they're not noisy. Otherwise, nobody would fit them. And secondly, will it give me heating and hot water? If we imagine that a heat pump is basically a very efficient electric boiler, it can do everything a boiler can do. It can heat to the same temperatures. It can use your radiators. That's what they are. The only difference is, to say an air conditioning unit would blow hot air into your office or wherever you've used to it, or your car, whereas a heat pump does it into the water instead. So that's why you get hot water and your radiators are warm. And they wouldn't be very, very good in the rest of Europe if they didn't do those things.
Oh, right, exactly. Yeah, that's
that's
always my counter argument. I'm like, well, why do why does everybody in Sweden have one, for example?
exactly. And Norway, I think, are up to 66% of their homes have a heat pump. And you'd have thought by now, if there's going to be an issue, they'd have probably clocked onto it. So heat pumps have been around for a long time, and nobody questions getting into the car in the depths of winter and turning the heat on. That's a heat pump and it's working.
Right.
But as soon as you say to someone, yeah, but it's going to do your radiators, blows their mind.
Yeah.
One of the big ones we get, which is interesting, is people have this issue with temperature. So we get people that talk to us about heat pumps and go, yeah, but my wife likes to have a really hot bath, and 45 degrees won't be hot enough, which is actually a typical bath temperature. And they think that they're having baths at like 60 and 70 degrees. And when you try and explain that they'd get 3rd-degree burns if they did that, it's very difficult. They've got this misconception that it needs to be really hot, whereas actually most people like their room temperature to be about 21 degrees, and most people have a hot bath at like 45.
Yeah.
So these boilers that we're fitting that pump out 80 degrees, it's completely unnecessary. But we've had this period of time over the last 50 years where we've spent time fitting tiny radiators into houses. So they need to be really hot to get the room warm. Whereas what we should have been doing is going, but we don't actually need 80 degrees. We're only trying to get a room to 21. So anything above that is waste.
Yes.
Now we're having to correct all this. And then the
final
one
of our sort of strange obsession with things that are more than we need them to be. And the same thing is the range anxiety thing with EVs, where people are obsessed with, oh, but it'll only do 300 miles. You're like, when are you ever driving more than 300 miles without needing to stop? It's it's funny, isn't it? So coming back to the kind of the early days of Heatio and how you were building out the proposition, I'm really interested in that kind of commercialization model and how you decided what segments of the market to target and why particularly, and how you've managed your approach there to kind of winning those first customers and that kind of brand piece.
So our main demographic, so we're about to go live with the platform, and our main demographic is the installer base. So whether you're in construction or gas or electrical or renewables, because they're on the front line of talking to consumers, we see those as the best uptake of the data and be able to get the best use out of it. So that's our main focus, which is where we've got the most experience. We've worked with installers for our entire sort of working life. So we've done a lot with installers. We've built tools for them before, and we have good relationships with lots of installers. So that's where we see the best uptake.
And although your proposition is B2B, you're enabling that B2B to do B2C. So are you communicating with the end user, or are you creating communication, education content for those installers to use to their B2C customers?
Yeah, essentially.
The B2B piece.
So our focus is B2B, but our job is to help the installer in this example. Obviously, our market's a lot wider, but if we focus on installers, it's to help them reduce their costs. So at the moment, installer would say, right, if I'm going to come and give you a quote, I'm going to need to come and visit your property. So if we can take that pain point away and say, well, what if you could do it all digitally? And what if you could get the same level of accuracy or better and more information about the property without visiting? Then you've reduced your cost, and ultimately you're going to increase your conversion rate, because what you're then going to be able to do is give your customer more accurate information. So rather than, for example, guessing what the impact would be of fitting insulation or a renewable technology, because we're using smart meter data, you can accurately give them a forecast that is their impact in their situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's sort of managing those two different drivers. It's that how is this going to improve commercial success for you as an installer, but how can you also communicate about how that in turn is going to improve things for your customers? Yeah. So sort of two different sets of marketing and comms, I suppose, in that sense. And tell me about the kind of early, are you able to share some of the early wins that you had from a kind of commercial customer or partnerships perspective, and perhaps tell us a little bit more about how those came about and why they were so pivotal to the early success of the business?
Yeah, so we our biggest success was we secured a place on a government pilot. So we had two wins on that. The first one was with a bank called Perenna. So that was looking at how we could use data to support green lending, so green mortgages. And then the other one was a partnership with E.ON to look at how they could launch a subscription model for the tech to remove the capital cost barrier. Again, you need very accurate data to underwrite that level of lending over a long period. So those two partnerships are by far our biggest wins.
Amazing. And how did you win them, and what was the kind of the challenge that you faced around that and the process of it?
So to be perfectly honest, we cold outreached in the early days to each of them. There's a big skills gap in the renewable industry because it's quite immature. There's not very many people that have got a high level of experience. So we went to them with a proposition of how could we help fill that gap for them and help them upskill. And then we identified that one of the big pain points was the data, and then it developed from there.
Okay, perfect. And you raised some funding last year, right?
Yeah.
How was that? Because I mean, famously, the current economy, the current market is challenging to fundraise in, and is much more challenging than it was 3-4 years ago for businesses. So talk me through that fundraising journey, how you approached it, and what how you found that experience.
So we were brand new to fundraising. We've never done it before. We've never been part of this world. So it was definitely a baptism of fire.
I suppose you didn't know any different.
Well, exactly. I mean, it was a difficult concept to get our head around, talking to people about investing in your business. But the way we approached it, because we didn't know any differently, was very much like a sales process. Okay. So you start with sort of cold outreach, you build some materials that are targeted to the people you're talking to. You go very, very wide because you don't know who's going to be interested at what level, and then you narrow it down. So unlike a lot of people that we found who do fundraising, who speak to very few people, we spoke to a lot of people and got a lot of interest and a lot of rejection, and it's a very time-consuming and stressful period.
Yeah, but I imagine doing it like that teaches you a lot about your business, because, like in the early days of launching a business where you go out and speak to hundreds of potential customers to understand, what they like or don't like about your product. I suppose it's a similar endeavor here, right? By keeping the net really wide at the beginning, you're getting lots of feedback, lots of thought, lots of criticism, often of your business, your commercial model, etc. What were the what were the main objections and challenges that you faced? Were there any key themes in that from investors, and what did you learn about your business going through that process?
Well, just touching on what we learned is that investors, which may be obvious but isn't necessarily obvious, are incredibly risk averse. So the more you can do to prove what you're saying matches up with reality, the happier they'll be. Okay. Which contradicts the early stage investors, who are supposed to be less risk averse because they are early stage investors, which is one of the biggest frustrations. Is we'd speak to investors who were early stage investors who would say that we were too early for them, and we couldn't get any further along with those conversations. So yeah, I think speaking to the right investors is a challenge. Everybody wants to see something different, and it's very difficult not to end up with 10 different presentations because of all the feedback you've had. Yes. So you've got to take the feedback, but also kind of stick to what you're doing.
And that's a really hard one, I suppose. It's like, what feedback do you take on board and iterate because of? Yeah. And what do you take and just go, okay, well, then maybe you're not for us, and put to one side? Was that just done on gut instinct, or did you have a process for deciding, right, what are we going to change and why? And yeah,
I think what we did was we collated a lot of it to see if there were any sort of common themes. Mm-hmm. But it very much depended on the investor and what the feedback was, because to start with, we did end up with quite a few different presentations. Depending on who the kind of investor was, we were tailoring what the presentation was, and then we realized very quickly it gets very complicated and very confusing. So we then sort of reversed out of it a little bit and started to stick to the knitting.
Yeah, sounds wise. And so after closing that round was it June last year?
Yeah.
What did that unlock for you? What did that enable you to do post raise?
So we'd basically already started because we couldn't wait. So it basically unlocked hiring. We expanded the team quite dramatically. It meant we could deliver on those two pilots that we'd secured. which required us to hire and basically build out the development team, build out the platform, and get us to where we are now with a really big infrastructure that's capable of doing some very smart things.
Amazing. And where was the team at in terms of size and skill sets prior to going into that round? And then since you've scaled up, where are you at now? What's that headcount?
Yes, I think we were at about 6 or 7, and we topped out at like 20, 21.
Oh, wow. That is significant growth then.
Yeah,
it's like 3xing. Amazing. And what was that journey like? I mean, how did you find that recruitment and growing the team process?
Again, more challenges, particularly around development and hiring developers, because they all come from different backgrounds, and we weren't necessarily going to get people who were from the sector. So we had to look for the skills that we wanted, but also the sort of drive and ambition for people that wanted to be part of a startup, because it's a very curvy journey when you're part of a startup, and it can go in lots of directions and lots of change and pace. So yeah, finding the right people was key, and we had to go through a lot of interviews together, similar to the fundraising process.
Yeah. I suppose it is. And I suppose, like you said, there's those 3 different areas that you need to assess them across, right? Have you got a passion for our mission in some way? Have you got the mettle to be in an early stage startup? And are you a good developer? And having to marry those 3 things and often trade off those 3 things, I suppose, against each other. What's really important to you when you were entering into that process of hiring and building out the team, and how much does kind of culture and the culture of the business and the values of the business feed into that hiring process?
I think the culture and the values has definitely developed. So we've gone on sort of a journey, because initially you've got to get stuck in, and the culture and values have to grow with you. So we've very much developed that with the team. But our biggest thing was we needed people that were driven like we were, that this isn't going to be easy. It's not going to be a 9 to 5. It's not going to be a corporate. It's going to be, you're in at the early stage, but it's like the social media movie about Facebook where they're drawing the code on the Harvard window. It's like, you're in at the early stage. You're going to be one of the ones that gets to be part of the success, but it's going to come with some crazy journey. Yeah.
And how do you really test in an interview that somebody could, because other than say, are you really up for this? And they go, yeah. And they might not really, they might actually not be. Are there any good ways that you've got for other startup founders who are listening? Have you got any good ways of truly assessing in your interview process who's really, built for this and who isn't?
I mean, the biggest tool we used was looking at their history. Had they worked at startups before? Because it's more challenging if they've only worked in big organizations, because it is a completely different culture, and their expectations would be completely different. So having come from startups was our biggest measure, because that gave us a lot of confidence. But then seeing how they approach the interview, how they approach the interview process, what they like to do outside of work is quite a good indicator as well, trying to get under the hood a little bit as to what makes them tick. So that's what we did.
Yeah. Amazing. And what did you learn from that growth phase, and sort of reflecting on how you approached that process? If you were to need to scale again at a similar rate, what would you do differently?
Well, I think probably use more external support for recruitment, because I think we could have saved ourselves time and money with who ended up being wrong. Just because even though recruitment can be expensive, if you get the wrong hire and you burn 3 months, even though yes, you can go again, you've lost the time, and that is very expensive. So yeah, hiring right is a challenge, and the more you can do to hone that down and get the right person, the better. And also incentivizing people with more than salary. So we wanted people that were driven more about building something for themselves, as opposed to just salary. So if anything, we went below, or our pay points were trying to be targeted at people that were looking for a pay that was competitive but not top end, and more focused on building equity, which is then part of that mindset. We wanted people that were driven by the equity building as opposed to just the pay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's hard to find, actually, because I find, as a recruiter myself and someone that specializes in working with startups, that the package often is a combination of basic salary and equity. But I find that it can be quite challenging to find people who really value that equity piece, and are as motivated by it as the founders would hopefully want them to be. So yeah, but like you said, it's a good telltale sign as to whether they are really got the mettle for a startup environment. What would you say are kind of some of the biggest challenges you've faced as a team over this last 4 or 5 years? It's been like the toughest moment.
Probably dealing with like the highs and lows is quite challenging because they're quite extreme. So,
Yeah.
being part of a startup, it's not as glamorous as it appears from the outside until you get to not being a startup anymore. It's very much good days and bad days, but they're really good days and really bad days. So yeah, that's the biggest thing, is getting your head around the highs and lows for everyone in the team, and being able to put your hand up and say when you need support, when you don't know something, and putting in the time, really.
Yeah. And as a founder, and obviously, somebody that's been a founder more than once now, right? How do you protect yourself through those immense highs and immense lows, and through those really difficult flashpoints like a fundraise or a scale up? How have you got any kind of good tips for other founders starting out on this journey as to how to maintain that work-life balance, how to protect your own self when you're going through this?
No, I haven't mastered that yet. So, I mean, having the ability to, or trying to switch off is probably quite important.
Mm,
Forcing yourself to do something different so that you at least get that mental break. I wouldn't recommend being a sole founder. I think
mm,
my biggest, or our biggest support is being co-founders and each other, that we can pick up the phone and just vent, or talk about a success, even if it's, you get someone big on the line from a sales point of view, and even if it's really at the early stage of the journey and you've got nothing you can bank on, but being able to talk about it and use it as a motivator is
yeah.
really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think having somebody else, like you said, that just gets it as well, that's, as invested in it as you are, and really cares about the highs and the lows, and that you can share it with, yeah, it must be invaluable. And what are you excited about? Talk to me about the future. What are the plans for the rest of 2025? What do you think the market opportunity looks like this year? Yeah, talk to me about the future.
So our big objective for this year is, so we're going live with the platform. We want to unlock the first installers, and we've also got some big enterprise clients lined up as well, who are basically really big installers. So seeing the first homes that start out with the data and then progress to, decarbonizing and moving towards renewables and that sort of thing. That's our big objective, is getting live, getting the first customers on, and seeing their customers coming out the other end.
Yeah. And I'm really interested to hear your take on whether you think the commitments made by the current government are taking the home energy industry in the right direction. Are you encouraged by the direction of travel under this current government, or do you think there's a lot more that still needs to be done?
Both. So the current government are definitely more committed and more consistent with the approach. They seem, and whether it's because of the mandate they've got, but they seem to care less whether they're popular, which means they're making decisions that, even though they're not popular, are the right ones.
Yeah.
So as long as they stick to that, I don't agree with everything they're doing, but as long as they stick to that in terms of decarbonisation and doing what needs to happen as opposed to what's popular, then absolutely, I'm very encouraged by it. Do we need to do more? Absolutely. One of the main things is, I think we've had far too long with the carrot approach of trying to incentivize people, and I think personally we probably need to go more towards the stick of saying, no, this is happening, and sort of forcing the journey a little bit more. So things like, banning petrol and diesel cars and boilers, fossil fuel boilers, those things need to stop getting pushed down the line and probably brought forward a little bit. Because until you address the fact that we're still pumping out the problem, you're not going to really address the total market. So yeah, a bit more a bit more stick, which I think is has got the greatest potential with this particular government anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for your time. It's been really lovely to speak to you and to hear more about the journey that you've been on, which sounds like it's been very exciting, and I'll be watching from the sidelines.